Good morning. I would like to thank you for attending our session this morning on multifamily residential performer workshop. We are very excited to have you with us today. We will be hearing from our speaker, Chris Cockerham, in just a minute. If you have not scheduled for next week's session on single family housing, residential housing development performer workshop, we would really encourage you to do so. That class will be next Wednesday starting at 9 a.m., not 10 a.m. I would like to take a moment to introduce Chris to you. Chris Cockerham has over 27 years of experience in corporate real estate, commercial property management, commercial leasing, commercial and multifamily investment sales, and residential sales. Chris currently holds a real estate broker's license in both Indiana and California. He is a graduate of Indiana University and also a graduate of the Institute of Real Estate Management Certified Property Management Program and a graduate of the Realtor Institute. Chris is a professor at the Indiana University Kelley School of Business teaching real estate classes, and you are going to get a session of one of his classes here this morning. He is an avid and dedicated member of our community, and he serves on boards and commissions such as the Community Foundation of Bloomington and Monroe County Board of Directors, the City of Bloomington Historic Preservation Commission, and he has recently wrapped up his service on the Monroe County Affordable Housing Commission. He has also served on the Foundation Board for Goodwill of Central Indiana Board of Directors, and he also is an avid participant in real estate organizations, serving as a director for the Indiana Association of Realtors and on the executive committee for the Indiana Commercial Board of Realtors. We're very excited to have him with us this morning. I'm just going to give you a little bit of a rundown on how we're going to operate this morning. Chris will be presenting. This is a workshop. It's going to have a lot of technical information. You should have received a link to download the documents a couple of days ago. If you did not, the link to those documents will be in the chat so that you can go ahead and download them now. He will pause periodically for questions, but please feel free to pop in your questions into the chat at any time that you have one. If I feel that it's a clarifying question and needs to be asked immediately, I will break in. Otherwise, we will hold the questions until he pauses to ask us for them. We will also have a short Q&A at the end to anything that we didn't get to. So I would really like to thank Chris for sharing his expertise with us this morning. And Chris, if you would like to join me.
Hi, Lisa. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So you can take it away. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for everyone for being here. This is what we're going to talk about today is real estate investing performas. And in some of you, it's a performa financial statement, which we look at whenever we look at when we review buildings. It could even be a business. And we also call it financial modeling. It's something that we focus on. I'm the director of the Commercial Real Estate Workshop at Kelley School. And it's a skill that we want all of the students to have when they graduate, because many of them go on to be analysts for REITs or private equity companies. And it's just a great skill to have, especially if you're passionate and you want to be involved in real estate. The thing, one of the questions I get often is, from freshmen in college to people, well into their years, is, how can they learn this information? Where do they go to find out? How can they get better at their financial modeling skills? And to be honest with you, it's pretty tough. There's a lot, and we'll talk about it during my presentation, but to be into commercial real estate, you typically will run or with an experienced broker for 3 to 5 years, and really you're just getting experience on valuing buildings. When you're looking at it from an investment standpoint, where do you go if you want to sharpen your skills? So we refer people to a lot of times YouTube videos. A lot of times you can find a lot of this information on YouTube videos, and I have some in my presentation that I can recommend to you as well. The other thing that we really want people to do and understand is how to understand the Excel program. most of the students that come out, if not all of them, of Kelly School, they understand the Excel program inside and out. I mean, a lot better than I do. In fact, I'm amazed with how well they can get around that program. Because many times I'm going to show you one model that I use every day. And it's one that I actually brought back with me from Los Angeles that I use in my business every day. But there's different modeling programs out there and that you might come across. They're all typically Excel based. So you might find one, you know, obviously I've shared the one that I use, but you might find one out there that you like better, that gives you the information that you want to use. But typically it's an Excel based program. So it's real important to understand Excel. Again, there are a ton of YouTube videos on how to learn Excel. You can even take some classes on it. But those are some of the things that we really try to emphasize if you're going to really be proficient in real estate modeling. So what I'd like to do now is just kind of go through our agenda for today. And let's see. I got to find it. Give me a quick second here. Okay. Oh, here it is. Let me share it. A couple things. You guys saw this slide come across, just a little bit more on my experience. I do own several companies here in town that I use these modeling skills for that I might share with you. I'm affiliated with FC Tucker Commercial, but I also have Cockerham Commercial. I'm also an owner in Comprehensive Business Brokers. So we use these modeling skills when I value businesses as well. I also own an auctioneering company for commercial real estate, and then just a general auctioneering company as well. So let me go to, so today, first off, I'd like to welcome, I've got my whole team on this call. Now, I'm the only one speaking, but obviously they help me every single day. I've got Betsy Sturgis, my licensed assistant. I've got Matt Netsky, who's an intern from Indiana University who helped me with this presentation. Cole Wida is an intern from the University of Evansville. And then I've also got Mason Ross, who's a senior at Bloomington High School North, very active in the mentoring program at our local high school. But we're going to start with just going through some basic real estate definitions and formulas. And for some people that are familiar with these, this may be, you know, old school for you guys, but really this is where the basis of our performance come from. And I want to make sure you understand where the definitions are, because you're going to see them in our actual Forma. And then we're going to walk through 2 case studies, which is something I do quite often at Kelly School, is we just model properties. So we're going to look at a 24-unit apartment complex in Bloomfield. It's an existing property. We're going to look at how it performs today, and we're going to model it and see, can we help it perform better? And again, like any business, we want to maximize revenue, we want to minimize expenses, and we want to grow our net operating income, which I'll go into more detail. Then the next one I'm going to show you guys is one that's a little bit more complicated, but it's one that we see in Bloomington quite often, and you might see it in your communities as well. But it's where you see a vacant piece of land and you think, you know, there could be a mixed unit development that goes there. So I've got one that's actually, you know, it's not been proposed, but it's one that's someone's been thinking about doing. And it's a 16-unit apartment building, and it has 4,100 square feet of retail space. And we're going to walk through that. So we've got a piece of land. So walking through this particular piece of property, we're going to kind of determine how much should we pay for that land, and then what can we do with that land, and does this project even make sense? So what we're trying to do is minimize the surprises, and we want to make sure, and my rule of thumb is I run things pretty conservative. I don't want to push it too hard, because anything can change. The economy can change. Just so many things so many factors out there we just have control over, that I really like to run our performance very conservative. I'm going to touch briefly on real estate finance. This is a whole section in itself, but things that we consider, and we'll talk about it during the Forma, is commercial financing. You know, right now we're in an economic downturn, but our real estate market has stayed pretty strong, and a lot has to do with because our lending rates are still very, very low. So money is cheap, and so that's really helped stabilize our real estate market. I'm still a little bit nervous on our market, but because I think it's very vulnerable right now. but commercial financing is a big factor. There's other ways if the numbers get tight, there's other ways that you can be creative with your financing. You can look to government assistance with tax credit or tax abatements. You can also look for other financing options too. As Lisa mentioned, I sit on the board of directors of the Community Foundation, and Bloomington and Monroe County is now a CDFI friendly community. So we have the Community Development Financial Institutions, which could be an option to help bridge the gap if you're having trouble making the project work financially. And then there's also a concept called impact investing. But one of the things you can look to is these other avenues for financing. And many times your local community foundation can be a great resource for that. And then I'm also going to touch on the YouTube videos. I've identified, Matt and I have identified actually 3 different YouTube videos that kind of expand on what we talk about today. So, and is there any questions or anything? And Lisa, feel free to jump in if anyone has any questions.
We do not have any questions at this time.
Okay, great. All right, so we're going to just jump into the definitions. And the order of these definitions are the exact order that you're going to see in our Performa. So at the top of our Performa, we start with the rent roll. Let me minimize those. We start with the rent roll. And the rent roll, basically, it shows us exactly how the property is performing right now with, the occupancy. It's a great resource for information. So when I first get a property, I want to get a rent roll and a 12-month operating statement. So, and I'll just walk you through here. So here's a rent roll right here. A rent roll has the tenant, has the units. This one here is an 11-unit rent roll. So, and I'll go to the top. So we have the units, we have the tenants, which I've blacked out here. We have the square footage of each one of the units. We have what's called the unit mix, which is how many 2 bedrooms, how many studios, how many 3 bedrooms. We have our gross rent potential. So how much do we think the market rent is if everything went great on this property and we maximized our rent? What would that be? And this information comes from a rent survey that we'll do in the area. And then we've got our actual rents. What are they getting in rent from each one of these tenants? We also have the deposits, and then we also have the expiration or the start date and the expiration for each one of these leases. Each one of these columns brings value to the Performa. How long a lease is brings value into how stable the property is. So all of this information, it contributes to the property's value. And so the rent roll is a very important part of us building our Performa. So, and again, this is 11 units, there's 8,100 square feet. The gross potential rent is $10,000 a month. They're currently getting $8,500 a month. So you're seeing that there's some credit loss and some vacancy in this property. And it shows the total number of how much deposits they have on the property. So then the next section of a Performa, we have the gross potential rent or the gross potential income, the GPI. And again, this number is, what we think the market is. What do we think we absolutely can maximize on this property? It's a number that we hope to achieve. And then from there, we figure in a vacancy loss and a credit loss. And the reason we say credit loss, this is typically a percentage. So we may look at Bloomington and Monroe County has a very strong occupancy rate. And one of the reasons why our market is so strong for developers to come to it is because we have probably a 98% occupancy when the market nationwide might be 94%. So as I see our local market here in Bloomington, we've got, 6 points of demand that typically on a Performa, we try to make the numbers work at a 94% occupancy. Well, Bloomington, Monroe County running at a 98 is definitely going to create even more and more demand. You get to the outskirts, Bloomfield, Bedford, some of these other counties, you're probably going to see 90% occupancy. You might even see an 85% occupancy. That's typically what we're seeing in those markets. And so then once we figure in, oh, and then the credit loss, the one thing that, so we figure a vacancy and a credit loss. And the credit loss is if somebody doesn't pay the rent, or if you have a delinquency, or if you have a something like that, that's a number that we build into the pro forma, because again, we don't want any surprises. If you buy a property or build a property, we want 6 months after you're done that the property is performing better than what we projected. So we want to make sure we're very conservative with these numbers. And again, I'll go through these in more detail when you see the pro forma. And this also leads into our effective gross income. So once we figure in the gross potential, we take the vacancy, then it's going to get us to our effective gross income. And this is the actual income that the property is bringing in. So that has a lot to do. The first 3 columns has to do with both commercial and residential. However, if you have commercial in your property, one other area that you figure in that's an income portion is you have commercial reimbursements. So when you rent an apartment, your taxes and your insurance are typically covered in your rent. Typically in a commercial setting, you will have a net rent plus the reimbursements. And there's 4 reimbursements. You typically have your property taxes, your property insurance, your common area maintenance, and you have your utilities. So you have a base rent plus you collect those items. Many times utilities are directly in the tenant's name, sometimes they're not, but you have that opportunity and that adds value to the property. So, and we'll go through this when we look at the second example as well that has the commercial property in there, and you'll see how that income is figured in. So negotiating a lease on a commercial side is really important on how you structure that lease. And then we have the adjusted gross income, which is we figure everything that comes in, and then plus other income. So the other thing, so the commercial reimbursements is other income, but we also want to figure in, do you have any parking fees? Do you have any laundry fees? Do you have any vending fees? So you typically you want to have, you really, again, you're running a business when you own a property and you want to maximize the revenue. So there's a lot of different revenue points, not only with rent that you can get, but again, you've got parking. For example, Simon Properties, the local mall here in town, they've got a lot of common area, but you'll notice during that common area, they've got, newspaper stands, they've got candy machines, they've got kiosks. Those are all extra income that property is able to bring in to maximize its value. So then once we have the income side of it covered, then we get into the expenses. And here's one thing that I find is a mistake. Yes.
I'm gonna ask you to pause for just a second because we do have a couple of questions that pertain to revenue.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I think you might have covered this, but let's just clarify it. Does the rent roll show rental payment history?
It does not. So the rent roll just shows the current tenant inventory, you could say. Where we're going to find the rental history is when we look at the 12-month operating statement.
Okay, and then the next question is, this is also revenue related, so I'm gonna ask this one next, is does the monthly pet rent or pet fees get counted in as other income?
Yes, they do. And that's a great area too, because for one, obviously, sometimes there's usually a deposit for a pet deposit, but a lot of times there is pet rent, and that would go into other income.
Okay, we have one more question, but I'm going to hold that one until the end of the session today. So
Okay.
If you'll pause at the end of expenses, I'll talk to you then. Thank you.
All right, great, thank you. Thank you, great questions too, by the way. So the other area is expenses, and a big mistake that I see is people don't really thoroughly think through the expenses of a property. And I love our appraisers here in town, but there's a lot of times that we go off of what market is showing and not what actual is showing when the property is being appraised. And so, a lot of times, and I'll just say, and you'll see this in a pro forma, we like for the expenses to be at 43% of the gross income. A property is ran pretty good at that number. What I typically see is properties are being ran between 50 and 60% of the gross income. So really, owners have to work really hard to run an efficient property, and no different than running a business. This takes a lot of effort, and really it maximizes the value just to run the property more efficiently. So this is the list of expenses that I always go through, and just make sure we have something in there. And if I receive 12-month operating statement and I don't see one of these expenses in there, I typically will put it in there in my pro forma, just because I want to make sure it's covered. So you have turnover costs. So if you have a student apartment building and you're turning over students, once a year or once every other year, you're probably gonna have a pretty high turnover cost. If I have a commercial property and I've got a 10-year lease on it, I'm not gonna have hardly any turnover cost. We've got our maintenance. We've got contracted services. And these are ones where we actually hire people to do it. So our landscaper, snow removal, cleaning services. We have management fees. Here's something that I'll see too, is a lot of individual property owners will say, hey, I'm just going to manage this myself, and I'm not going to put a management fee in there. I always recommend you do put a management fee in. For one, a bank's going to want to see a management fee, because if they ever have to repossess the property, they're going to have to hire a manager, so they want that built in somewhere. And hopefully that never happens. But also too, you want to be paid for your time. So if you're going to manage that property, you can still take that income, and it's anywhere between 5 and 10%. I've seen even 12%. You still want to be covered for your time. Also too, at any given time, if you decide you don't want to manage it yourself, you can hire a manager, and you know that fee's built in from the day that you bought it. So that's one area that I see that people will remove that. Utilities, pretty straightforward. General administration, I see a lot of people not put a number in here, but typically you will buy this property with an LLC, and you're going to have to do taxes on it. So again, when the day we buy a property, I want the property to completely stand on its own, and I want it to be self-sustaining. I don't want to ever have to write a check again to sustain that property. So I will actually put in there, legal fees and also accounting fees to make sure that those are covered, because those are real costs for you to own this property. Then we also have marketing fees. We have property insurance, taxes, payroll. You may have an employee. And then another area that I see people remove, and this is replacement reserves. A lot of people, if the numbers aren't working right, they try to figure out a way to make the numbers work right. So they start playing with the expenses, which I think is real dangerous. But one of the things I see that people want to remove is the replacement reserves. And what that is basically the property itself is creating a savings account. So, and we like it to be between 3 and 6% of the gross income. And what you're doing is you're putting money away. So say it's $5,000 a year. In 5 years, we've got $25,000 in replacement reserves. And then all of a sudden the property needs a new roof. Well, you've got it there to pay for itself. And the property paid for that roof, and you didn't have to write a check for it. So again, this is something I always want to run the numbers and make sure that number's in there as well. I've included a couple of charts here, and this is operating expenses per unit for a garden apartment. So if you'll see, now these were taken from IRM. No, actually these were taken from the National Apartment Association. So these are the fees, and I'm going to lower that just a little bit. So a little bit more. Okay. So this will show you what market averages are around the country. And this again is for a garden apartment, which is a low level apartment, 1 or 2 stories, maybe, 1 or 2 stories typically. So you've got taxes. And so I always like to compare where my expenses are to what general market is. Now, keep in mind, I've got to evaluate the local area that building is in, but I typically like to just kind of see where am I at? How am I falling? You'll notice management fee is 9%. Yeah, I'm seeing 9% here locally. I'm seeing 7 to 14%. So this falls right in between. Contracted services, 7%. And then I've also put in another chart here, which is a high rise. So this would be anything over probably 3 stories. Just gives you an idea. They had management now is management's 7%. The reason why I think that management fee probably goes down in this is because you have more units and the income is higher. So that's probably why that number goes down more, but this kind of gives you an idea of how properties are ran nationally. And again, you'll notice I've set my pro forma up to match all of these expenses, because that's the other thing too, is I want to be able to compare everything to what the market is doing. And then I can decide, can I run it better or worse than what the market is doing? Yes. Yeah. Okay. So Matt just asked a question. Is there a percentage for replacement reserves? Typically 3 to 6%, somewhere in there. And we'll see that in our pro forma too, and we can play with the numbers. Hey, Lisa, before I get into the formulas, which I want to run through, is there any questions?
Nope, that was the only question, and Matt asked you. So you're good to go. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So now the next section, so that's pretty much how we set up our pro forma. And again, you're going to see this when we actually go through the numbers, that it follows exactly in that order. So the things that we look at, and this actually is an order is in an order as well. So all of these, so I've got gross rent multiplier. These are the formulas that really, for anyone in investment real estate, they need to understand these returns on investment. So you have gross rent multiplier, which is probably the most basic way to value a property. And I really want all of my students to know this, because I run into clients every day who this is how they run their numbers. They want to base it on the gross rent multiplier. And basically it's assessing the value of a property on the annual gross income. The challenge, I think, with gross rent multiplier is it does not figure in any expenses when you're figuring the value. And every property's ran different, and every property has different expense ratios. So I think it's really dangerous to base your decision only on the gross rent multiplier. A lot of times you'll see residential housing property, like a house next to campus or just a rental house out in the rural area. They'll base it on gross rent multiplier because a lot of times those owners don't have the expenses. I always like to have that number because I like to see how that number relates to other return indicators. So the next one we have is a cap rate, and this is probably the most widely ran one. So it's the capitalization rate. So basically you're taking the net income, then the NOI, it's the net operating income. So this is the income after expenses have been removed, and the assessed value of the property. So you're taking the net income and you're dividing it by the value of the property to get the cap rate. So you could do pretty much any algebra state, and move that number around. So if you have the net operating income and you have a cap rate, you can figure the value, and vice versa. And so really what determines the value of a property, and what we put all of our weight in, is the net operating income. So we want the net operating income, which is basically, the revenue minus expenses gets us to our NOI. That's the value we use when we value almost everything. When we value a business, when we value a piece of real estate, we really put a lot of weight into the NOI. And what I tell people who buy properties, your goal is to increase the net operating income. So however you can lower the expenses or raise the rents, you need to constantly be moving that net operating income in a positive direction. And that could be through rent increases, that could be running the property more efficiently. So then we've got the gross rent multiplier, we've got the capitalization rate, the cap rate. Then the next indicator is the cash on cash return. And I will get, so the cash on cash return, and the reason why it's so important is many of the properties, you have to take money out of the bank. So if you have $100,000, let's say, in the bank, and you're trying to decide, what am I going to do with it? Am I going to leave it in the bank? Am I going to invest it into the stock market? Am I going to buy a piece of property? Am I going to buy a business, or am I just going to spend it? So you've got all these options with the money that you've saved. The cash on cash return is that direct relation of, so if I buy if I leave it in the bank, I'm going to get less than a 1% return, but it's a very safe bet. Whereas if I look at investing this property into a piece of real estate, I'm probably going to want a pretty high cash on cash return. I'm going to want maybe a 10 or a 12% return on my money. That's hard to achieve, but you're taking risks there because now you have to manage the property. You have to roll your sleeves up. You may have to, renovate the property. So there's a lot more risk involved. So it's all risk relation, but the cash on cash return is what is the return you're going to get on the cash that you actually invested into the property. Then the next indicator is the debt coverage ratio. And this is very, very important because this is how a bank evaluates your property. And I'll show you in our pro forma, all of these indicators are in there. But the debt coverage ratio is, can the property pay for its debt? And typically a bank wants 1.2, once a debt coverage ratio is a 1.2. That is pretty much there. We always try to get a property to that 1.2 debt coverage ratio. And that's for an apartment building. Now, if it's like today, right now, something very soft and very vulnerable is hotels. A bank may require a 1.5 debt coverage ratio on a hotel in our market today because right now they're vacant. A mini storage facility, they may want a 1.35 debt coverage ratio. So when you're interviewing a bank, and depending on what product type that you want to invest into, you might check with them, what debt coverage ratio do you want? And that way, when you go out, maybe you hire a real estate broker or you just do it on your own, you know what kind of debt coverage ratio you're shooting for. And I'll explain this a little bit more detailed as we go through our pro forma. The last one, and probably the most, the one that's used mainly by real estate investment trusts and large companies that are really focused on buying large properties, is they look at the internal rate of return. And the internal rate of return is one, if you really dive into commercial real estate, you could use these numbers. And what it does basically is when you buy a property, you figure your net cash flow for all the years that you've owned it. So if you've owned it 5 years and you've got a net cash flow, you've made $100,000 a year on that property, you've got $500,000, and then you sell the property. And then after expenses, you had equity and you netted another $300,000. You might have netted over that 5-year period $800,000. Well, then you can figure your internal rate of return based on the total cash that you took from the property. I don't typically go to this level, and you will not see many people in our markets go to the internal rate of return level. If you go after institutional investors, they will go after this because they will figure a hold period. They'll buy this property and they're going to want to hold it for 10 years and then sell it. Excuse me. And they will want to know what their expected internal rate of return would be over that 10-year period.
Chris, we have a couple of follow-up questions, if you
Yes.
don't mind.
Yep, please.
Going back to your question about replacement reserves, the follow-up question was of yearly cost or purchase price?
It's all based on income. So you want to be a percentage of your income, and that's your gross income. So it would be 6% of the gross income is what you would put towards your replacement reserve. It could be 3 to 6%. So
Okay.
not tied to the purchase price or acquisition price, but only the income that the property brings in.
Okay, great.
And
then we have, I'm sorry?
And that's annually. All of these numbers I'm talking about are annual numbers.
Okay, great. And then we have another question. It says, if you renovate a building, would you adjust your project maintenance or reserves cost versus if you're operating a dated property?
Absolutely. Yeah. So if you go in and you replace all your HVAC, your heating and cooling, obviously you hope to get a long life out of those. But that's why it's very important when you buy a property that you really know the age of the roof, you really know the age of your all of your mechanical systems, and you thoroughly inspect them. And that we do have some really great companies out there that will inspect a property for you. You may have the skill set to inspect it yourself, which is great. But asking a third party to come in and inspect it, and they'll give you a report. Because really, when you're purchasing a property, you want to negotiate those items up front, and just kind of determine that. But yeah, so you could adjust, to answer your question, you could adjust. You definitely want to adjust the replacement reserve based on the age of the property.
Okay. This question you may actually answer when you go through your pro forma, but just so that you know that it's something you need to highlight. On debt coverage ratio, how do you incorporate coverage for private debt used to buy slash renovate the property?
That gets a little bit more complicated. Yeah, that one, that would be, that's a hard one for me to answer on the spot. The that would be, I would want to pull into a bank. So my lending institution, I'd want to pull them into that conversation.
Okay.
And that way we can have which I do many, many times. I've got really great relationships, as I would advise any of the real estate investors to have, that you can pull them in to that conversation, because that's a broader conversation. What I'd like to do, Lisa, is I'd like to put some thought into that one, and then maybe we could email the group out and I could give a more detailed answer on that question.
Absolutely. And then you have a question about mini storage units. He wants to know if that area is weak right now. He's heard a lot of support for self-storage in both up and down markets.
It's interesting. So my class, we take 50 students, well, before COVID, we took 50 students up to Chicago to meet with private equity companies. And I was so blown away, because basically we were trying to help them find jobs up there. But these companies would tell us what their investment strategy was. I was so blown away that the hot item is mini storage facilities. It's what I like about it is it's low infrastructure cost. You're not putting in bathrooms and kitchens everywhere. The other thing that I thought was so interesting, so to answer his question, it's a very hot market. I happen to have 100,000 square feet listed on the over here in town, and I get national mini storage facility developers calling me all the time that would like to do what Jefferson Shreve did down in that area, which is build mini storage within a large building. But it's a very, very hot market right now. The other thing that I'm seeing, which I thought was really interesting, is they're going into cities, into infill, where there's a vacant lot, and they're putting a 3 or 4 story mini storage facility indoors. So the ground level you can pull in, you've got freight elevators, it does not take up any parking need. You don't have to build a bunch of again, bathrooms and kitchens and all of that, and it can fill a spot. And so a lot of these private equity companies, they were looking in large cities for vacant lots that they could put a high rise or a mid rise mini storage facility, which I thought was great. Now, for to being community minded, it doesn't generate much retail traffic. So I don't know if it's the best thing for a downtown area unless you really had a distressed property, but that is something that they were really looking at. So mini storage is definitely a hot item right now.
Yeah, well, and it doesn't help us increase our housing inventory, which is one of the goals of our activities here. And then the final question that we'll cover in this little break is, how do you estimate future property taxes after purchase?
So that's a great question. So in the state of Indiana, we're all market based. And so when you go in and you buy a property, so say a property was held for 20 years and it has a low assessed tax rate. When you go in and buy it and you pay the new market rate, that's gonna affect your taxes. So when you run a pro forma, you want to figure in what those increased taxes are. And you can figure those. So again, building relationships with your local government and your tax assessor, and just knowing those numbers and having an accountant on staff as well, or just access to one, your taxes will go up. Now, I will say this, what happens in my industry, and I know there's probably people on here that know this as well, or government officials, but we're seeing properties trade, they're buying the LLC, and then the value of that property gets hidden. So then the assessed value does not get figured in. So that's something I'm seeing pretty common in my field, like it or not, because governments obviously need the taxes to operate. But that's one way they're avoiding having the property retaxed. But that is something you want to figure into your numbers, and really knowing the tax rate, knowing what you paid for the property, you can kind of do a guesstimate there on where you think your taxes could be. And you definitely want to figure that when you do a pro forma.
Okay, well, thank you. You can continue on and I will let you know when we have additional questions that need clarification.
Okay, that sounds great. Okay, so then the last section here, and I've got it it's in your packet. So these are some resources that you can find on YouTube. So we've got, what is a performa? And this gentleman here, he does an excellent job of, I guess talking about exactly what I'm talking about today. And he just does it in a different way, and it's highly produced, and it's a great video. Then we have another basic investment performa, and then we also have a commercial real estate appraisal evaluation method. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about just one of the appraisal methods, which is the income approach. But typically when I appraise a property, I'm looking at the sales comps, and I also want to look at the replacement cost. And so really to do a full appraisal, those are the three appraisal methods that you want to consider. But what we're going to be looking at today is only the income approach. So, so Lisa, any questions before I dive into the performance?
Nope, I think you should dive right in.
All right, so I'm going to switch our screens. So I'm going to stop sharing and then go into, okay. So I had ROI send this out to everybody. And so what we've got here, and if you'll notice at the bottom, I've got different tabs. So I've got the Bloomfield apartment one, which we'll go through. I've got our new development one, and then I've given you two blank tabs to that if you have an investment property and you want to play around with, feel free to enter this in there and use. This is the actual performa I use every day. And just so you know, I mean, I'm going to run 3 performas today. I mean, this is what we live and breathe in this Excel document. And we're always running numbers on properties and businesses. One of the things I want to caution you with is this is all, none of the formulas are locked. So I would create, if you're going to do one of these, I'd make a copy of it. And then I would go in there and one of the things that I'm always nervous of that I check over and over and over again is make sure one of my formulas didn't get messed up or I mean, obviously if you know Excel well enough, you can lock these formulas, but I keep them unlocked and I just double check my numbers always. And the more that you run these numbers, you're going to see where cap rates come in, gross rent multipliers come in. If you see something that looks a little off, I mean, check your numbers again. So it's really important that that these numbers are scrubbed and look great. The challenge you're going to run into, hang on just, don't scroll, okay, gotcha. So one of the things that you'll want to do is just make sure that you, because you can make these numbers look however you want, but you want it to be the truest picture as possible for your financial institute, for your future goals, for an investor you may bring into the property. You just want to make sure that there's no mistakes and really try to limit those mistakes. So I'm going to take this back to the top, and I apologize if I scroll too much. Matt just told me not to scroll as much. So hang on just a minute. I'm going to take this to the top. And so we're going to start at just as I have it in my definitions. We're going to start with the rent roll. So this is an actual apartment building in Bloomfield. It's 29 units. Now, typically, I don't have the rent roll on this one here, so I don't know the mix of these apartments. I'm assuming they're 1 bedroom. But typically, if I were to know them, if I were to have knowledge of the unit mix here where there's apartments, I would put 1 bedroom, 1 bath, or 2 bedroom, 1 bath. So that typically goes there. We do know that it's 650 square feet. So 29 units times 650, we have a total square footage of 18,000. I typically would go into GIS and verify that as well, which is our Elevate we use locally, which is our, it's a great resource, which I'm actually going to get us into here shortly. This is the actual rents that we're showing there, which is $332 a month. Now, I will mention this. So when I received this information, they just gave me what they're collecting. So this $115,000 is already figured in their vacancy. So I don't have a gross rent, minus the vacancy to get to this to get to this number. I'm only basing this on what they're collecting. So they're collecting an average of $332 a month, but that already figures in vacancy. So I'm going to go up just a hair here. If you'll notice, I've got the vacancy number here on line 14 as a 0 because that number is already figured into here, which I have to keep that in mind as I run our numbers. So then I've got this is my 3-column pro forma. So I've got actual, I've got target, and I've got market. So I've got the actual, and I'll actually go over here to market. And if everything was humming and the market was great, maybe I could get 600 a month out of it. Now you're saying I'm doubling it. You'll see that I'm doubling it from the actuals, but I'm actually figuring in vacancy in this market here. So if I were able to get 600 a month. So one of the things to look at too is we look very hard at the price per square foot by the month. So right now they're getting an average of 51 cents a square foot per month. I'm thinking, can we get to 92 cents a square foot per month? That is something that is figured in. And I'll just tell you where the market is really strong, downtown Bloomington, they're getting $1.80 a square foot. So you can kind of see, this is Bloomfield, you'll see the difference in the market. So this center column is a target. What I like to do when I'm evaluating a property, I will look at actuals, I'll look at market, but then the target is, how am I going to run this property? What is a realistic, conservative way that I'm going to run this property? So if I'm at 332, market's at 600, I'm basically saying, what if I got 450, which is 69 cents a square foot per month? So if I were able to get, which I think is realistic. So really, I think I could get 450 on this deal. So if you'll notice, so I'm going to focus on this center column here now. So my gross potential, so 450 times 29 units, I get 156,000. I'm going to take out an 8% vacancy, and that is a market number. And that's a number that you'll have to just call around and find out what the market is in whatever area you're looking at. Like I told you here in Bloomington, we're at a 2% vacancy, a 3% vacancy, super strong market. Markets in the outskirt counties could be 10% vacancy. It could be 12%. I think I can run this at an 8% vacancy. So then I get to my effective gross income, just as we're following my definitions. And then we have other income. On this particular property, I have not figured in any other income, but as I would dive into this property even more, I'm going to probably think through, do they have laundry? And I don't know this property super well. So do they have laundry machines? Could there be a laundry room? Could there be, and I'll go through the expenses here, and there's some areas in the expenses that I think we could generate some additional income as well. So I'm going to take us down. So here, right here at line 17, I've got my adjusted gross income. This is a financial, a pro forma financial statement. So we're just building this on our own. So I'm showing in the center column here, $144,000. This is an annual number. So now I've got to take the expenses out. And if you'll notice there, just like we talked about in the expenses, I've got them all in the exact order. And what I like about this is the exact order that I can compare it to a national number. So looking at this here, I'm figuring, and again, these are assumptions. So some of these are real numbers, but when I received their operating statement, they did not have a turnover cost. They did not have the taxes in there. They didn't have some of these numbers. So I'm going to actually look at this here, and I have to make some assumptions. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to put in here $4,700 a year. It's going to cost me to turn these over for vacant units. I threw in a $10,000 a year maintenance fee. I've got contracted services. So as you get better at running numbers, in the state of Indiana, well, Southern Indiana, typically we mow our yards 29 times a year or 28 times a year. And I only know that because I've managed a ton of properties. So you've got to figure, okay, is it going to cost me $50 a month, $100 a month to mow these times 29? Then you're also figuring in their snow removal. Fortunately, in Southern Indiana, we've not had a lot of snow in the last 3 to 5 years. So that number's been pretty low. But as you know, in Indiana, we could get hit at any time, which we're going to get some snow today, which I'm sure there's going to be snow plows out there making money today. And then I've got in here a management fee. The management fee is at 5%, and I'll be honest with you, that is too low. But this could be a number that I think I'm going to manage it myself. So I actually probably want to take that to an 8% because that's going to be more realistic. So a number that is a red flag to me is this utility number, line 24. That number, that's super high. So in my opinion, so that's 20% of their gross. So as I think through this property on how I can run it more efficiently, I'm going to think, can I charge back utilities? And I'm guessing, and again, I'm guessing looking at these numbers here, that this number here that they're getting at $333 a month includes utilities. So they're, in order to get these leased, and maybe the market, that's the market they're in Bloomfield, that it's a gross number and that includes all your utilities. What I would try to do and see if the market would support this, and I'm going to go down, so sorry about scrolling. I'm going to say, can I recoup some of that? Can I lease one of these units for $450 and say, plus there's $100 a month utility charge? If I'm able, and if I feel the market would support that, I would then come up here in other income and I would add in here, whatever I can collect back in utilities. And that could be one way that you could increase this income number, is to charge back some of this utility number. That's one way to do it. Keep in mind the market may not support it, but if the market did support it, that's an area that I could see some income growth. As I go down through here, you'll notice I've got $1,500 for general administration. I've got a marketing amount, ads in the paper, whatever, Facebook ads, whatever, to try to push the value in these. I've got a insurance number, which actually I'm going to tell you I think is too high. I think that number might be, and this is just from my market knowledge, I feel that should probably be a little bit lower. That is an area that you could go in and negotiate. A lot of insurance company, it's a very competitive business. So, bidding out the insurance is one way to bring your income down, or raise your NOI. And then we have property taxes. So if you'll notice, the property taxes right now are at 17.5. I figured if someone were to buy this and pay a little bit more for it, that their taxes are going to increase, and I accommodated for that. I've got a payroll expense here that you might have a property manager, on staff, or you might have a maintenance person on staff. So I've got that in here. And if you'll notice, I've got a replacement reserve of 3%. So here's the thing. So going down here, so I'm looking at these numbers here. And I've got, so my expenses, and if you remember what I said earlier, I want this number. So in line 32G or 32I, the 69, I really want to try to get that number down to 43. So I've got to really work hard to figure out a way to run this building more efficiently.
Chris,
yes.
we have a couple of questions. I think this would be a good time to maybe answer some of those, if you don't mind.
No, yeah, please do. That'd be great.
Okay. So the first question that we have is, why are contracted services separate from maintenance and repairs? Often we hire a contractor or tradesman to do R&M as well.
Yeah, so the way I look at it, and again, I break this down because this is the way the National Apartment Association does it. Because these are contracts, because those are areas that, so for example, you can bid those out. So in other words, the mowing business is very competitive. You might have HVAC maintenance. These are separate contracts. So I like to look at them separately because I can compare it to national average separately. When I look at repair and maintenance, so I might have a maintenance guy here that it's a part-time job for them. And to where they're able to go to the local hardware and fix a toilet or fix a sink or whatever. That's what I typically am going to put into repairs and maintenance. And then that's going to be combined with the payroll expense. But a contracted services would be solely, what a pest control may run, or what a mowing service may run. Some people combine those. So many times I may get a 12-month operating statement, and it's going to have repairs and maintenance all bulked into one. I'm going to try to go through their line by line and pull out the contracted services. And really the reason why I do that, because I feel those are negotiated items. And again, I can compare them to national averages. So that would be my answer. Hopefully that answers your question.
Okay. I know that this example is for Bloomfield, but I do have a question about Bloomington. They ask, are you concerned with rent vacancies in that rent vacancies in Bloomington will increase with COVID?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because I work with national companies as well. We've got national apartment companies that are dying to get into this community. Me locally, knowing many of the property owners here locally, I do get a little bit nervous because, for one, I'm working on a business right now that caters to the Asian culture here, which we had typically 7,000 or 8,000 Asian students here, which are probably all back home right now, who are not renting their apartments. So, we had a pretty good international crowd, student base here, and most of them are probably back in their home countries because of COVID. So there is a concern. It still feels like the market is somewhat strong and stable, but I feel we're very vulnerable and it could go either way. And I'll be honest with you, that is the main reason I started the real estate auction company, because I feel that, unfortunately, we may see some properties get repossessed, and I wanted to have a commercial real estate auction company to help banks sell these properties. So I'm kind of banking on it a little bit, but I hope it doesn't happen. I do think we're very vulnerable. It's stable, but keep our eyes wide open, put it that way.
I will tell you that most of my international students are here in Bloomington. So I guess it just depends on what you teach.
I like it. Okay.
We have another question. Was utility information given, or was this an estimate?
No, this was given. That's what hurt me so much. This was based on their actuals.
Okay, and then finally, the last question that we have is: shouldn't the marketing and admin and payroll be included in the management fee, or does that just cover leasing?
No. So the management, that's one thing to be real clear about. What is your scope with your management company? That's sometimes in there, but typically management companies have a lease up fee. So typically if they were to lease an apartment, they want half the rent for each of the apartments. So they'll not only have their management fee, but they'll also have a leasing commission. So when I say marketing, this could be leasing commission. This could be, something else. So, typically on this particular scenario, I'm guessing that this marketing is leasing commissions. But as far as a management company, you have to really define your scope with them. So their job is really to help you lease the property, which you typically will pay them a commission to help that. They will advertise through their means. Hopefully they have a great network of advertising through social media or their website, and they generate a lot of traffic. You're paying for that. You're also paying for them to collect all the money. So that's really the accounting side of it, is the bulk of what they get paid for, is they collect the money and they make sure that you have good solid tenants and they qualify those tenants. They will also manage your maintenance and repairs, but you typically pay for those separately. So they'll help manage those, but you still have to pay for those. So defining the management scope is real important. And all managers have different scopes. It's just between each individual and what you want them to do.
Okay, we had one more question pop up, and then we'll go back to the presentation after this.
Absolutely.
Is the expense ratio being calculated using the AGI or the EGI? Is it considered other income such as commercial reimbursements?
So I go back and forth, and I know this is kind of a gray. So like if I were to hit there, I've got this one here is based on the AGI. So I've got, I've seen it both ways. Some people will base it on the gross potential. I've based all of these expenses on the AGI, and that's just for me. I just feel it's a more truer reading, but you may see it on a national level based on the gross potential. I like to base it on the income that is received, and that just might be a personal preference.
Okay, thank you, Chris.
Absolutely. So I'm gonna just play with this for just a minute and just show you how we. So I'm gonna take that that utility number and I'm gonna just say, what if I charged $100 a month times 29 times 12? So 29 times 100. So let's just say I collected. So like let me think this through real quick. So if I'm at, okay, so say, now this goes a little bit higher. So I probably would not do this. So I'm just saying, if what would this performer look like if I was able to recoup some of the utilities? And I'm not going to go to 100. I'm going to go to $50. $50. So that would be 34.5 divided by 2. So if I collected $17,250 from the tenants, and it may take a while to get there, what does that do to my numbers? So if I'm able to recoup my utilities, it didn't bring this down as much as I'd like. No, because I'm still going to be charged the utilities, but I'm going to collect it, so it's going to offset that. So that 17,000, it's going to make a little bit of a difference. It didn't bring my percentage down as much as I would have liked, but that would be one way to do it. Okay, so I'm going to remove that right now. But as I think through how am I going to run this property, I'm going to play with some of these numbers and these scenarios. Again, the whole goal is I want to be realistic, but is there a way that I'm able to bring this down to a more reasonable number? So I'm going to come down here and just, now we're getting into the section of the return numbers, the investment return indicators. So if you'll notice over here, and I'm on this center column here. So this is my target. So I've got my cash on cash return. I've got my cap rate. I've got my gross rent multiplier. And down here, I have my debt coverage ratio. So I start with, what do I think the cap rate is for the market of this area? So Bloomington, I'll tell you, my opinion on Bloomington, I think it's 6.25. And that's a number. If this was a Bloomington property, I'm gonna value this property based on a 6.25 cap rate. In Bloomfield, it's probably an 8 cap, but I feel that this property could be stronger. I feel we could get the expenses down, so it's making it really hard for me to take it to an 8 cap. So I'm going to leave it here at just under a 7 cap, which is very aggressive. I probably can't find a lot of 7 caps in Bloomfield. They're probably going to be 8 to 10 caps. Now, what I'll tell you is the lower the cap rate, the higher the value. So keep that in mind. So if I'm down to a 6.25, the value of this is probably going to jump up to 750. So if I'm at 641,000, I'm at a cap rate of just under 7%. What this does for me, okay, if I go down here just a little bit further, if I were to buy this property and I put 25% down payment, so I'm down in this section here, 25% down payment, which typically a bank would want, I would have to come out of the bank or have to raise $160,000 to buy this. That would be my down payment. That would be the money that I would be risking to buy this property. So looking at that, if I put 25% down at a 3.75% interest, which is aggressive, but our interest rates are low. On multifamily, they typically will amortize this over 25 years. My debt coverage ratio is a 1.5. So I know based on this, a bank would loan on this all day, because really they want a 1.2. I'm at a 1.5. That's pretty strong from a banking standpoint. I do want to say something though. A 1.2 debt coverage ratio, even though a bank would loan on that, it's not always a great investment. It just means that the bank would get paid back. So it doesn't mean you're going to make a lot of money on it. It just, the bank feels secure about it. So that's one thing you want to keep in mind. But based on this 641 with 160 down in these terms, a bank, you know, you could get banking on this, and a bank probably would be pretty interested in loaning you money. So now if I go back up, and I'm gonna lower this, hopefully it doesn't lower in your screens, but So my $160,000, if I pull that out of the bank, what am I going to get on that money? So then I go up to the cash on cash return, which is this 40G. So I'm going to get a 9.22% return on my investment if I invest $160,000. Now keep in mind, you're only netting 14,000, but if you look at the percentage of it, and let me make sure, just verify my expenses. Yep, good. If you, that's a pretty strong return. So if you look to yourself, if I leave this in the.
Okay, that was a little bit of a glitch this morning. So we're back up. We're gonna try to give everybody a few minutes to come back in, and then Chris, if you would mind getting started again. I
Absolutely
greatly apologize for that technical difficulty. And while we're waiting, we have a question. So let's go ahead and ask that question. That'll give people a chance to get back on. Chris, how do you think storage units are doing in rural areas?
You know, I had a just personal experience. I happen to have a mini storage facility listed down in the Bedford area, and I never sold it, unfortunately. And but it generated a ton of activity. People wanted to buy it. I just didn't have solid numbers on it. Unfortunately, the owner did not run great books, so we couldn't. And that's the other thing to mention too, is when you do have a property, you want to make sure you run really good books because you want it to be financeable. And so that's where we struggled, and I was not able to make the deal happen. But the demand in rural areas seems to be pretty strong. Now, we all know Jefferson Shreve, Storage Express. And just so you know, when I go to Chicago, he is considered a rock star in the storage industry. Obviously, he's done very, very, very well. When I talked to Jefferson about his investment strategy, he likes to be in those rural areas. That's where he's generated an entire business. He's got one in Mitchell. He's got one in Bedford. He's got you could drive through any small rural town in Indiana, and Jefferson Shreve probably has a mini storage facility there. So obviously Jefferson feels it's pretty strong, and he's probably the expert in our area for it. So I think they do well. I think they could do well. I guess the challenge that I would think in some of the rural areas, knowing the zoning, when you think of the barrier to entry. So to do a mini storage facility in Bloomington, it's going to be probably pretty tough. In fact, I just am closing a deal tomorrow. In fact, that's going to build a new storage facility here in Bloomington. And it's been, it's a little bit rougher, not rougher, just more challenging to get through ours, because obviously we care a lot about our community and how it's going to look. Some of the rural areas may not have as strong as zoning laws. So if you build a mini storage facility, how hard would it be for competition to come in there and build another one? So that would be my only thought on risk in the rural areas.
Okay, great. I think that people are still joining, but I think we're ready for you to move forward. Thank you, Chris, for your patience with us during our technical difficulties.
Yep, absolutely. I get it. So, hey, thank you guys for logging back in. Hopefully we can get, everyone can join back in, but I'll finish this up here, and then I want to dive into the new development one. But a couple points I want to make, and Matt pointed this out to me as well. When you look at the debt coverage ratio, a debt coverage ratio 1 means that it's paying for the property. So all the money you bring in is going to the bank. So that's a 1. You get to a 1.2, you've got a little bit of, a little bit more, 20% more cash coming in. You get to a 1.5, obviously, if you have 150,000 coming in, 100's being paid to debt, 50,000 is going to pay to the bottom line. So that just to give you an idea on the debt coverage ratio and how a bank looks at that. And again, that's an indicator that we look at on how financeable a property is. The one thing I do want to point out here, so I've got my cap rates here. I've created some values, but I want to look real quick at the market column, and I'm going to go back to the top here. So this is the dream. This is if we could get $600 a month, if we could do it, an 8% vacancy. Here we were able to get, if we were able to raise that income up, we're able to get our total expenses to a more reasonable number, which is 55%. But if you come down here and look, if we're able to get, and this is why we want to achieve market and really push the market, our initial investment of 160 now turns into a 35% return on investment. So going into a property and that's not being ran great and needs better management, and you coming in with your skills and you're able to push it up to market as much, this is the kind of return you can get. And this is why people like real estate, because they can control it. If you buy stocks, there's no control. You just buy your stocks and hope the companies do well. One of the things that people love about real estate and why they're so intrigued by it is because you can touch it, you can feel it, you can make it a better property, you can add value, and the return can be fabulous. But I will say you have to work really, really, really hard to get to these numbers. But a lot of people are really good at it and they can do this. So this is one of the things why real estate is so intriguing to people, and why my services are needed in the community, just because people want to find these deals. I will tell you that it could go the other way. If you do not watch your properties, if you do not run it efficiently and in good business, your property could devalue. So that's why, and I always caution people when they get into real estate and property management and all of that, it's not for everybody. Many times people will go, pick up 20 houses and then, 10 years later say, you know what, I really don't like doing this anymore. And then they sell them. So really think about your product type that you might want. Really think about how you would want to manage them, because I will say it's not for everybody. But the people who do enjoy it and are passionate about it, they do have the potential of doing really, really well. So I'm going to leave this. If there's no questions, I'll move on, but go ahead.
Actually, we do have one question before you move on. So the question is, would you buy this property? And what are your key criteria for determining buy versus no buy? And if it's no buy, at asking how do you back into what you could offer?
Okay, so if I were to buy this property, and hopefully the seller's not on this call, but if I were to buy this property, I would want to run it off of these numbers here, the 450. And to be honest with you, I would want to get this to an 8 cap. So the way I'm going to just show you what that number is. So I'm showing this bottom number here at 595. I'm going to come up here to the net operating income, and I'm going to go, so the 44,465, that net operating income here, I'm going to divide that by 0.08, and I'm going to get a number here of, and that we're doing our cap formula, 555,812. So I want to buy this as an 8 cap. I'm only going to pay 555,000. So let's take it up here, because a lot of my numbers here are based on this number. So let me take my 555 and put it up to my asking, and you'll see the numbers where they come in at. So 555,812. So this is where I would buy this property. I'd want to pay no more than 555,000 at an 8 cap, knowing it's not getting the rents there, but I think I can achieve them pretty quickly. But if you'll notice, my down payment's now 138,000. My cash on cash return is at 13.5, and I'm going to make a net cash flow. So the net cash flow is what I'm going to be taxed on of 18,000. So these numbers for Bloomfield is where I would, me personally, I would look for deals like this all day. Now, here's the thing to remember is the reason why we run numbers so much on these properties. So I know this deal. I know what I would pay for it. I would look to see what they paid for it. They might have paid way more than this. And so then I would know, wow, they're not going to take a loss. I'd also want to know what, if they paid $385 for it 10 years ago, I'd say, okay, a 555 might be a pretty good offer. But I would call and I'd let them know where I was. I'd say, hey, I don't mean to offend you in any way, but I just want you to know my numbers and my investment goals. I'd be happy to be at 555,000, and know that they're probably going to be upset with me, but I like to let them know where I am, because at any given day, they may wake up and say, let's dump this property, and they'll give me a call. So that's sort of how I go through the offering process and kind of my strategies. I come up with a number that I think makes sense, and I make sure that that seller knows that I'm there. And it's worked. So hopefully that answered your question.
Yes, they commented that they thought that was a good answer. Thank you. We do have one more question. And I'm going to chime in a little bit on this one too. Would you be concerned with smaller rural markets dying over time? So I'll let you go first.
Yeah. So did you say vulnerable markets dying over time, or
smaller rural markets?
Oh, gotcha. So smaller rural markets. So the challenge with rural markets are, and we obviously have a housing shortage in our region. So that's stabilizing the apartment market. But, people, you would think that you could buy a house more affordably. So when you're looking at an apartment building in a rural market, your competition's not only the guy across the street that has apartments, or the group that has apartments across the street, but also someone that's going to go buy a house. So, you really got to tune in on your housing market, and then you also have to clue in and really on your monthly payment, because you have to think to yourself, if I'm in, Bloomfield and I want to get $450 a month, can someone go buy a house for that? That, an affordable house for that same payment. So that's really who my competition is. So I'd really want to tap into, that'd be a pretty inexpensive house actually. So I would want my rental market to be very competitive for what the mortgage rates would be. And I'm going to watch that pretty closely. I do think the rural markets are probably going to be a little bit more vulnerable. The reason why you'd want to get a better return, because it's a higher risk. But that's probably, I'd really want to clue into that and know that, I've got to upgrade these units all the time. I want to make sure that they're nicer units, because someone that may be going to buy a house may also say, is it time for me to buy a house, or should I just rent? And I want to make sure I'm somewhat competitive. So I'd want to make sure I stayed up on, and I had, good, clean, safe units all the time.
Well, I totally approve of good, safe, clean units all of the time, since you know about my past life. But I also want to note that one of the things that we're seeing with, people being able to work from home more is that location, is more of a choice. And we're seeing some really wonderful development in our smaller rural markets that I think is going to continue to be a positive trend in the future.
At least I totally agree. I totally agree, because people love living in our rural areas. And they drive to Bloomington, or to Crane, or even down to Evansville. Who knows where they might find their work. But because one of the positives that are coming out of our work situation is people can work from home. I think the challenge you run into, and I know we deal with this in ROI every day, is connectivity. And I think the stronger, and we're making big strides in that, but the stronger that we can, and so that could be a big indicator that you look at. Do you have good connectivity? Do we have good cell towers? Do we have good internet in those rural areas? That's only going to help your apartment building and your rental properties.
And as you know, ROI is working on that. Okay, great. I think we are done with our questions. So if you would like to move on to your next example, that would be lovely.
All right, great. So the next one here is kind of a big one, but I'll move quickly on this. And again, you have some of this as well. So I'm going to switch our screen to our GIS. And if you're not familiar with, and this is something I cover real heavily in my classes. So this is our GIS system, which has all the parcels in Monroe County. This is developed by 39 Degrees North, which is an IU group of guys that developed it in the very beginning. They now have several counties that they cover in the state. Not all of them. We have 92 counties, and they only have, they might have 20 counties that use this system. I love their system. There's also Beacon that's out there. I know when I tap into Vigo County, even I think Greene County is Beacon. So there's other systems, but what I tell my students is every county in the state of Indiana has a GIS system. So you have access to a lot of data. So if you're in commercial real estate, you live and die in this. I'm on this all the time. So this is the site that I wanted to show you, and I'll show you where it is. So this is a real site that's for sale. I just met with the owner. Here's Patterson Drive. Here is the new development over there where Rogers Group was. What's it called now? The Dillon. So this is the Dillon all over here, and the quarters. And if so, there's a lot of great data on where rent should be. So if I zoom back in, excuse me, I'm sorry. So here we've got a site, and I've got an owner that wants to sell it. And this owner thinks it should be redeveloped. So she's got 3 parcels here. And so what's interesting, and I'll show you, so we've got this parcel, and then we have this parcel right here, which she has no control over. She pays taxes on it, but there's a billboard on it right now, and that the billboard gave it to the city. Excuse me just a second. The billboard gave it, the billboard company gave it to the city. So she cannot build on this section. And so, which makes this site pretty challenging. So you ask yourself, how in the world could you, how could you redevelop this? So let me show you the ideas that came up, and I'm going to switch screens again. So one of the first things you do when you develop this site, and hopefully everyone can see that, is you have to have the property surveyed. So here's the actual survey. That's the actual building on the site. And these are, we've got all the parcels, and you'll notice that here's the line that comes across. So she's got her parking. So we go to a civil engineer, and we ask them to design a building on this site. So we create a concept, and I'm going to switch over, and this is the concept that was created. So we have a building right here, and we have a parking lot, and you notice we've stayed off the parcel that has the billboard. So we've got our parking, we've got parking along here. So this is what the developer came up with. I'm sorry, the civil engineer. And then let me switch one more time. Stop share. And then we developed this here. So we took that site, we developed a building in size, then we went to an architect and they designed this building. And so this is the building. Let me see if I can go back. I can just show you different views. So it's a 3-story building. One of the nice things about this building is you don't have to put an elevator in it. An elevator can add a couple $100,000 to your cost. We have 4,100 square feet of retail. And then we have 16 apartment units in there, and they're all 1 bedroom. So this just gives you an idea of what we have. So just to give somebody a perspective on cost. So if you find a site like this, you've got to ask yourself, what do I want to pay for it? And I'll tell you, this particular seller wants $950,000 for their site. So we know what a number is. That's what they want for the property. And so can we develop this building and get a return on it, and and pay her $950,000 for that property. And then she's also thinking, does she want to actually develop this herself? So this is the other thing she's looking at. So we've got this building here, and so now we need to do a pro forma. We need to figure how much do we have to pay for this? What's it going to cost us to build this? How much rent can we get? What's it going to cost to maintain it? And what type of financing options do we have? So let me back out, and I'm going to go to our pro forma again, and we'll work through this one. All right. So I am going to go to, move this up here. So I'm going to go to the new development folder here. So this is a different one, and I've given you a copy of this as well. And so what this has in it, so we developed this one here so we could look at a development property. So if you'll notice here, you can put commercial in here or residential. This is going to be residential. So we put a property type and property revenue, and this builds down into the formulas. We've got the total square footage of the land, and we've got the total square footage of what we're hoping to build. And then I've got 3 different scenarios in here. And the only difference in these scenarios is what are we willing to pay for the land? So I've got scenario 1, which is her asking price of $950. I've got scenario 2 of $800, and I've got scenario 3 of $750. So if we were to buy this property, these are the different scenarios, and it also helps me determine how much do I want to pay for this property. So as we run numbers on this, we've got our scenario. So now I like to figure in every penny that you put into a deal. So if I were to buy this deal at $950, my seller closing costs are going to be, buyer closing costs are going to be about $6,000. So I'm going to have a closing fee. I'm going to have an attorney fee. I'm going to have, buyer's title insurance. I'm going to have, again, an environmental phase 1 recording. So it's going to be about $6,000 for me to buy this. I'm going to have $956,000 into buying the land itself. Then now I have to ask myself, what is this going to cost to build the building? So, and Matt worked really hard on this. So we researched what market averages were for site work, utilities, landscaping, engineering, permits, tap fees. So we want to figure in the total cost here. So we went through and broke each one of these down. So, excuse me. So we've got $75,000 for site work, utilities, landscaping, building costs, which seems pretty low here, but we're looking at a total cost, engineering fees, architecture fees, which is $65,000. And then we also have a contingency of $150,000. So if we paid $950 for the land, plus our closing costs, we will have $3 million, close to $3 million into this property. We would have a total of 192 a square foot. If we paid $800, we would have 182 a square foot. If we paid $750, we'd have 179 a square foot. So knowing the square foot price, that's a number that you can utilize Google, and you can pull up, what are market averages to build an apartment building per square foot. You're going to see anywhere between probably 155 and 230. In my opinion, I feel you could definitely build this deal anywhere between 179 and 192. We could make this deal, could definitely happen in this price range. Question now is, does it make sense financially? So if we drop down in here and we put in some assumptions, if I'm able to raise the rent 3% per year, if I'm able to keep my expenses from raising from 2% per year, again, these are assumptions. What do my numbers look like? So again, just like we did on our last pro forma, we build a rent roll. So now keep in mind, these are all assumptions, and we're building this off of rent. So what Matt was able to do, he was able to call around in the area and see what rent was going for. What was the Dillon asking? What was the Quarters asking? I think there's the Sunset Apartments that are around the corner. What are they asking? So we do a rent survey to determine what is an achievable rent. Obviously, we know the commercial retail market, so we kind of figured what's a realistic rent for retail. So we have 16 units here. They're 1 bedrooms. They're 650 square feet each. We think we can get $950, which is $1.50 a square foot. So that's going to be a little bit hard to get, but we think we can get it on a brand new building. So we're only looking. So this is a different pro forma. We've got our actual column. Then we have our first year, second year, and third year. So here's our actual. This is we're building it on building it. Then how are we going to perform year 1, year 2, and year 3? So I'm going to just look at this first column for now. So then we've got 1 retail space. Now here's a little bit kind of funky with my program here. So this is all based on per square foot per month. Commercial is based on an annual basis. So I take that $1.21 times 12. I'm thinking I'm going to get $14.50 a square foot triple net for that, for the 4,100 square feet. Here's the thing you got to ask yourself when you're leasing commercial properties. Who am I going to lease this to for $5,000 a month? Am I going to split it in 2? Am I going to leave it as 1? A scenario that I use, I think that any business needs to pay, my rule of thumb is of their gross revenue, they need to pay 7.5% of their gross revenue. So if I'm looking at $51.62 for a gross monthly rent times 12, that's $60,000. If I divide that by 7.5%, the business that we put in there to survive needs to do 800,000 in sales. If I put somebody in there that does less than that, they're probably not going to survive. And I don't want to put anybody in there that does not have the best chance of surviving. So I need to keep in mind how many businesses out there, how many restaurants, retail that I think. So if I split it in two, each one of them, they're going to have to do 400,000 per side in gross sales. So I've got to think to myself, are there businesses and is there a demand out there? So that's one of the things I want to think through just to make sure I don't have a vacant space there for 3 years. So that's something to really think through and put a lot of thought into.
Chris, we do have a question on demand, if you would entertain that now.
Yeah, absolutely.
So with mixed use requirement in Bloomington, do you think that these first floor retail will lead to an oversaturation of retail units and more vacancy?
You know, we do have quite a bit of retail on the market right now. I think, yeah, I mean, we're going to add more to it. I think what I'm seeing from developers now is they don't want to even start a project until they've secured a retail tenant, because it is so difficult, and you don't want to have a space that you just struggle to fill the retail on. And so what I'm finding from the developers I'm working with, they're holding off. They're like, we don't want to start until I know my retail's full. Now, the challenge we run into, and I serve on the planning commission, is once a project's approved, how long is that approval good for? So I know of a development that we actually just approved. They don't want to start until they find a retail tenant. And they reached out to me, and I told them to reach out to our planning director. But how long does their approval last? Well, what if it takes them 2 years to secure that tenant before they start building? Do they have to come back to planning commission? I don't know. That's something we'll have to think about. But it's a big risk. And most of the seasoned developers that I work with, whether it's industrial or what, they don't want to build unless they've secured that tenant, because it's too big of a risk. So I think adding more vacant retail obviously is not good for our market. And I think right now the retail is, obviously took a big hit from COVID, as any service industry has. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the future. I think there are still people out there that want to open businesses. They're passionate about it. They want to do it. I'm pushing that they make good decisions. What's going to happen probably in order to lease this retail is they're going to have to lower their expectations in rent. And they're going to have to, maybe not $14.50. Maybe I need to run a pro forma here at $10 a square foot. It's going to be hard to push the rents.
Now, in my previous life, I used to see pro formas for housing where the housing covered the entire expense for the development, and the retail was really not calculated into that pro forma. Is that still standard?
It is standard, but it goes against kind of what our goals are here locally, because the goals is to create more affordable housing. But by requiring retail, we're having to move our rents up in order to cover the cost. So it goes against promoting affordable housing.
Okay, good point. We have another question. We have another one on expenses, so I'll ask you when you want to entertain that one. But the next question on demand is, what type of business would you want to see in there? And does one type of business benefit your occupancy more than another?
Well, so everyone loves the thought of a coffee shop, because it adds value to your property and it gives a service to your tenants. The thing is a coffee shop, you got to ask yourself, can they do 400,000 in sales? A lot of people love restaurants to go into space. But because of COVID, I'm kind of interested to see our retail space is going to be redesigned differently. So in other words, if a Starbucks came to town, or a retail space, are they going to design a different building today because of COVID? Are they not going to have as much indoor seating? So, I mean, I think people love the thought of a restaurant because it adds value, it adds traffic. My thought is it's going to be harder to land those types of tenants. The other types of tenants that people like to land, is an insurance agent, or, maybe a hair salon, or somebody that adds value to the neighborhood as well as gives a service to your tenants. Excuse me. So who I would look for if I had this listed, I would look for probably a restaurant, because I think a restaurant could do 800,000 in sales. I think they'd be hard to find, because one of the things too is you've got to build out a restaurant, and it's not cheap to build out a restaurant. I would then think about breaking it into two parts, and I would try to find probably a coffee shop to go there, or an added service to go there. And then from there, it really falls off on what type of service could go there. This building has some pull-up traffic, so that might add some value. But to be honest with you, it's going to be a challenge no matter who you put there.
So I have another question that popped up about how those retail choices would impact your parking issues.
It would definitely impact it. So because you want to have parking there for your tenants, but you have to, it's a very delicate balance, because you want to have parking for your tenants, but you want to make sure that a business that goes there can survive. So you're going to have to manage that parking very closely.
Okay, we do have one more question on expenses,
Yes.
and we are, unfortunately, because of our little glitch, running out of time. But
Yep.
What type of business? Oh no, I'm sorry, I already asked that question. Generally, how much can you expect to pay for a civil engineer and an architect to get that far with planning?
Well, so she's got invested $40,000 right now. So just for example, David Howard, who's a developer in town that I've done a lot of business with, he developed the taxi cab here locally. And I usually have him come speak to my class. And before he had it approved, he had, obviously all the site plans, he had the architect, and he had not even taken it fully through planning. And he had $100,000 invested. Okay. So it's not uncommon to have between 40 and 100,000 invested, and at that point decide you don't want to do it, because you may not, you need some of that information in order to build my Performa. We could do a lot of assumptions, but at the end of the day, you want to have as much of that information as you can, so you can be very accurate on your numbers. So it's not cheap. Getting in development is not inexpensive, and there's a lot of risk to it. Okay.
If you could sort of wrap up your last few points in the next 5 minutes, I have a couple questions I'm holding for the end, and then we'll wrap up our session and end on time. That would be great. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So you've seen me go through the previous Performa, so I'll go through this a little bit quick, but a couple things I want to point out a little differently. So keep in mind here, now I'm going to do something here. If you'll notice, I've got a 1 and a 2 over here on the far left hand of the screen. If I click 2, it opens up this whole Performa here. So I just wanted to make sure you knew of that tool if you wanted to play around with these Performas. So I'm going to go back and click 1 again and shorten it back up, but I wanted to point that out. So as I go through this, and this says prior year, but this is really year 1. So if I go down through columns E and F, I've got my gross potential income. I don't have, here's the thing that I'm kind of gray on. I don't have a lease up period here. I'm saying we're going to be we're going to run an 8% occupancy, or 8% vacancy from the beginning. That's a big assumption there. And if you'll notice here, if I go down to line 85, I've got $19,000 for commercial reimbursements on that 4,100 square feet. That is about, let me see what I put in here. That is 28% of the building. So I took 28% of the property taxes, the insurance, the common area maintenance, the contracted services, and the repairs and maintenance. I took 28% of that, and I'm going to bill back the commercial tenant. So the way I'm going to pitch the commercial tenant, it's going to be $14 a square foot plus $4.64 CAM charge. So that's what the tenant will pay. And I built that back into my added income. So I'm going to get billed for it, but I'm going to collect it back. So then I get to my total income, And if I go down here, let me just go down to the end here and just kind of show you what comes out. So I've got my three cost scenarios. I've got the 29 million, the 28 million, the 27 million. If you'll notice year one, and I'm just going to go over here to these two columns here. So this is really year one. If it cost me 29 million, this deal breaks even year one. Year two, with a 3% increase, I'm at a 2.4, and at year three, I'm at a 3% return on my money. So if I'm able to get this, if I'm able to buy the property for 750, which I don't know, the seller may not take, I'm able to get a nine. Now keep in mind, you're risking here $750,000 to get a 1% return on this. So you'll see the numbers are pretty thin. So I've got 9,000, 9,000 year one. So I'm here. So year two, I'm at 26,000 or a 3% return on my money. Year three, I'm at 32,000 net and almost 5% return on my money. What this tells me, and here's what's crazy, is I'll probably maybe list this property and we may get 950, but if I were to do this deal, I would want to pay 750 or less for the land and know that this is a 3-year ramp up and I will have this property stabilized in 3 years. Anything can happen in those first 2 years. You're taking a big risk. But if you'll notice even here at the bottom, my debt coverage ratio on line 148 is a 1.25. So this deal doesn't really make sense until I get less than 2.8 million, 2.8 million. So I really want to build this deal. So thinking of in scenario, I want to buy the land for 750. I want to have my total construction cost be maybe 180 a square foot. And then I'm gonna give myself 3 years to stabilize the property. So if I were to build this and I'm an investor, I would probably want to hold this deal for 10 years and not sell it. But that's just my investment strategy. Some people would try to sell this thing within 1 or 2 years after building it. But that would be my investment strategy. So Lisa, I'll let you ask some questions, and if anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy to talk to them more about it.
Okay, great. Thank you. We do have one comment about the cost of holding the project while you go through zoning, construction documents, and construction, a total of 18 to 24 months with no return on the money, and then you start getting rent.
Exactly. So if you'll notice up here on line 39, we do have construction interest built into our numbers. So that we figure that number into our total investment, the carrying cost.
Great. All right, we do have a couple of questions that are sort of general in nature, so I held them until now. So I'm going to ask the second one first. As a instructor at Kelly, do you have any recommended textbooks on this subject?
It's interesting. So one of the things that we have, and this was actually carried over from Professor McCoy, who I took over his workshop, he wanted all the students, before they start the workshop, they have to read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which is very, very known book on investment. So that's one that we always have them do, and I actually test them on that as well. The other thing is we have another one. If you'll give me a quick second, I'll find it. I have another reading that I asked them to read before they join, and it has to do with investment real estate. So hang on just a second, and I can find it for you. Or better yet, Lisa, why don't I send you an email with the books that we recommend our students to read, and then and then if you want to send them out to the group, that'd be great.
That would be fine. Okay, and then the next question, you may also want to answer this in the follow-up email, is do you have any sources for templates for commercial leasing documents?
I don't. We've got a couple of them. So the best thing to do, and we all hopefully, is develop a relationship with a local attorney, because what I typically do, and I'm not an attorney by any means, but I have several different lease templates where we'll change some of the terms on it, but I always recommend that they have their attorney review it. because obviously it's a legal document. And again, not being an attorney, I don't have the expertise to modify it too much or at all, really. But we do. So what I suggest, I've seen people that will go to local, office supply stores, and they've got templates, and they're not the best, to be honest with you. You can also Google, if you have the software, you can also Google them, and you can find some pretty good ones. But if you have a local attorney and you just paid them enough to draft one, and that became your personal commercial lease document, that is what I would probably use. In our state documents, our zip forms, I know lately I've got a couple of landlords that want us to use the zip form commercial lease document. I just lease the space out, and that's what we use. So if you go through a local realtor, they have access to that, and we have a license that can use those documents. So, but that's what I would suggest: either an attorney or hook up with a local realtor, and you could probably get what you need.
Okay, I think we have a couple more questions that have come in, but we're running out of time, so I may send those to you to answer, and then we'll send them back out. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, no,
All right.
great.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for providing us with this information and the templates and all of the documents that you sent to us to disseminate before the workshop. I thought this was really informative, and I greatly appreciate it. Next Wednesday, we will be having a session that will be focused on single-family residential development performas, and that one will start at 9 a.m., not 10 a.m. So make sure that you note the time difference. If you have not registered for that, you can find the registration information on our website. We have been recording this. We will probably edit out our technological glitch, and you will be able to watch it. It will be posted on our website, and so you can watch it again if you need to, or you can share it with people that you think would be interested. All of our sessions have been recorded and posted on our website. If you have any suggestions or ideas for future workshops, please send those comments along with the follow-up survey that we will send to you for participating today. And again, I want to thank you greatly for being patient with us while we experienced our first technological breakdown. We look forward to seeing you at future sessions. So thank you again. Thank you, Chris, so much. And
Absolutely.
thank your staff, please, as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for the invite.
Thank
Thanks.
you
Bye-bye.
very much. See you next time.